d'uopo sforzati. Beh, sei tu forse un uomo? Tu sei pagliaccio. Vesti la giubba e la faccia in farina, la gente paga e rider vuole cuore se Arlecchin til volo colombina. Ridi, pagliaccia, e Alium applaudirà. Tramuta in lazzi lo spasmo ed il pianto, in una smorfia il singhiozzo e il dolor. Ridi, pagliaccio, sotto amore e infranto. Ridi della tua che t'avvelena il cor.
You're listening to 92.6 FM Radio Verulam. My name is Richard Wyborn, and we've just been listening to Vesti la Giuba from the end of Act 1 of Leon Cavallo's 1892 opera Pagliacci, sung there by Ezra Williams. And I'm extremely privileged to be joined today at Radio Verulam by Ezra Williams. Hello, Ezra.
Hello, Richard. Thanks for having me on, and nice to talk to you.
Well, thanks for joining me. Ezra, can you tell us about that aria?
Yes, Vesti la Giubba is the big. There is one other tenor aria in the opera. Well, technically two, actually, but that's the most famous one by far. And it's often translated into English as "On with the Motley," which is basically he's painting his face, making himself up as a clown to go on and entertain an audience, be funny. All the time, his heart is breaking. And he's going through inner turmoil and having a dreadful time. It's the interpretation of Canio, the character, has changed a lot over the years. He was often in the past portrayed as the sort of wronged hero in a way. But of course, you know, society grows and times change. And I think now a lot of tenors, myself included, portray him as what he is, which is he's kind of abducted a very, very young girl and forced her to be his wife. So he's not a nice fellow. So I think a lot of the heartbreaking stuff in that aria is actually kind of self-pity. And of course, at the end of the opera, he kills her, the young girl, and kills another guy as well. So, you know, he's a very unpleasant fellow. But the aria is incredibly moving and the music is so fantastic. And of course, Pagliacci itself, which roughly translates as clowns or traveling players, is together with Cavalleria Rusticana by Mascagni, the two big founding cornerstones, if you like, of Verismo opera, which roughly, you know, translates as realistic. So before that, they had all the kings and queens and the witches and spirits and all this. And Pagliacci and Cavalleria Rusticana are about the everyday man in the street, man and woman in the street, or the tavern, or the village green. And so it was a new direction in Italian opera. Pagliacci, I think, was first, and Pagliacci famously contains the huge baritone prologue, where the character literally comes on stage and says, hello to the audience, welcome. We're now going to tell you a story about ordinary people. I am one of the players. And this had never been done before in opera. And so, yeah, those two are often performed as a double bill together, but sometimes they're done with a different opera. I've heard an interesting Pagliacci done with Purcell's Dido and Aeneas recently. So, yes, I mean, they're both one-act operas, and they're fabulous to sing, and they really suit my voice now. So I love singing them. I last did them both together, I think up in Manchester a few years back. But I love them, and I'm always on the lookout for new productions.
Am I correct in thinking that recordings of that aria by the Italian tenor Enrico Caruso were amongst the best sellers of the 78 era?
Well, I mean, I'd go further than that. I mean, I think Enrico Caruso kind of began the whole recording industry. He was famously, I think, paid something like the equivalent of today, £30 or something, for going to a hotel room, might have been in Naples or Turin or somewhere, and recording the equivalent of something like 15 opera arias, one after the other, a feat which is unheard of today. I mean, the average recording session now, if a tenor's recording a solo CD, it may not even contain 15 tracks, and they'll have a whole week to do it in. So for Caruso to do 15 in one afternoon is astonishing. And more to the point, and of course, these became best-selling records. They became best-selling 78s. And he became an international superstar, the very first international singer in a way. Before pop stars, before any of this, he was traveling from, Italy to New York, to Britain, to Covent Garden, to all these places to perform. And he became a superstar. And it sort of kickstarted the recording industry. What I would also say is one of the most amazing things about that recording session, where he recorded all those arias in one go, is that, you'd think one would start getting tired and flagging by the end. And yet, even to this day, more than 100 years later, some of those recordings still remain some of the most inspired recordings of those arias. Now, of course, the recording quality itself is nowhere near what we have today. And of course, the voice, we can't really tell just how astonishing his voice was, although it's very clear. Technically, he was an astounding singer and a wonderfully emotional singer. Just listen for one, example to his Una furtiva lagrima from La d'Amore, where he crescendos on one F in the middle of his voice. And it's a most astounding thing. And even on the early recording, you can get the feeling of, wow, this was quite astonishing. And of course, technically, he's still regarded as one of the greatest of all singers. Pavarotti probably comes a second, a very distant second in terms of technical ability. But yeah, I mean, we all love Caruso. We can't ever deny the legacy that Caruso left, both for classical singers and the recording industry itself.
We do not hear much about Leon Cavallo's other operas today. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I would hazard a guess that it's to do with what I said earlier, that they founded a movement. And with any movement, they take a while to get going. So when Puccini came along, the next generation of Verismo composers, Puccini became the greatest and most famous exponent of Verismo. And yeah, Leoncavallo, let's not forget, of course, his name means heart of a lion, which is wonderful. And Mascagni as well, who wrote Cavalleria Rusticana, they're both really famous for those single one-act operas. Leoncavallo does have some other operas occasionally done, but they're often famous for one big number. And they're usually done as part of like, for example, an opera house will put on a season of showstoppers. So they'll put on a Verdi opera, let's say La Traviata, or big selling things like Madame Butterfly. And then as a kind of, cultural thank you, they'll slip in one of the unknown Mascagni ones. Because singers do love singing them. It's just that I think a lot of the reticence of opera houses is, will they sell tickets for these because they're not so well known. L'Amico Fritz, for example, is a fabulous opera. It's lovely. There's two bits from that are quite famous, the Cherry Duet and Ed anche Beppe Amor, which is the big tenor aria. But apart from that, nobody knows the rest of it. And it's a shame. But again, you know, it's the same with musical theatre now. There's some wonderful shows that I've heard over the last 10, 20 years, which have just disappeared. And in some ways, it's not to do with the quality of the music, because the music's great. An example of this might be the show Groundhog Day, based on the film. It was a wonderful musical, but just disappeared. So in a way, we should, I guess, be thankful for the ones we have. And it's one of the mysteries of theatre that some of the shows just don't survive. It's, you know, it's like an actor will tell you when they're filming a film. It can be the best script in the world, but you don't know if it's going to be a hit or not. You cannot tell. So, you know, if it is a hit, you're very lucky. But Mascagni was a man of the theatre, as was Leoncavallo, and they understood this. And they made a good career. They made a good life for themselves during their careers. It's just that in hindsight, after the fact, their work has not endured so much.
Well, now we're going to hear an aria from Cavallo's opera La Bohème, which premiered in 1897 and is based on the same story as Puccini's opera of the same name. This aria from Act 3 is sung by the Italian tenor Enrico Caruso. There we heard Caruso performing an aria from Leon Cavallo's opera La Boheme. Ezra, has Enrico Caruso been an influence upon you at all?
Oh, enormously. I think any tenor alive today, if they denied that, they'd be lying. Certainly for people who do perform in operas. I'm not talking about concert singers so much, it's not leader singers so much. But Caruso was phenomenal. I mean, we talked earlier about his actual technique. But, the diction, you could hear every word he sang, which is not always the case with modern or more recent singers, despite the improvements in recording quality. Caruso is, the line comes from Caruso. We all aspire to be that wonderful. And also, don't forget, one of the unbelievable things about Caruso is that he was, I think, dying when he was my age. So he didn't have a long career at all. He didn't make it, I think, into his 50s. So I think he was 43 when he died. So, I'm nearly there. And I would consider, that's the prime as a tenor. You should carry on till, minimum 65, but, others carry on till 80, Geddo, Domingo. So it was very sad, and goodness knows what he would have gone on to do. He never, of course, got to sing Verdi's Otello. That would have been amazing. He did sing Fanciulla del West. He, in fact, sang the world premiere of that at the Met, which was, I think, Puccini's only premiere outside of Italy. It was premiered at the Met in New York, and Caruso sang that, but there's no recordings of that. And there is a wonderful little story about the young Caruso going to sing for Puccini at his villa at, where is it? Something del Lago. I can't remember where it is exactly in Italy. But, and it was to audition for Puccini's new opera, which was going to be La Boheme, Puccini's version of La Boheme. And apparently Caruso sang just in his drawing room with Puccini accompanying him on the piano. He sang the Act One aria, the famous Your Tiny Hand is Frozen. And Puccini laughingly turned to him and said, Signor Caruso, who sent you to me? God himself?
Well, you said that Verdi didn't, that Caruso didn't sing Verdi's Otello. I think Caruso sang quite a lot of Verdi, didn't he?
He certainly did. But he sang a lot of French repertoire as well. He sang Meyerbeer and La Juivre and all this stuff. For his age, he got a lot of stuff done. And of course, let's not forget the actual recordings. But there's no full complete opera recording that Caruso did. So we don't have a view of the whole role. But he was still singing right up to the time he, I think, had a hemorrhage on stage. So he was a very ill man, even when he was still singing. And it's a very sad story, but also a kind of sweet, bittersweet, I suppose is the word, that he was forced into early retirement. And some young tenor, he doesn't say who it was. It could have even been a journalist, I'm not sure. But someone came to see him like a week or so before he died. And Caruso just was feeling sort of okay that day. So just started singing an aria. And I think it was Ma Paris from Marta, which is not a very well-known opera, but that aria is very famous. And he sort of, tears came into Caruso's eyes and he said, my gosh, it's coming back. I can sing again. And then a week later, he died. He never did get to make that comeback, which is very sad.
To what extent was Giordano's opera Fedora composed with Caruso in mind?
Well, Caruso was the best tenor voice of his generation, so I think a lot of composers would have probably composed with him in mind. Although I don't think any great composer really writes with only one singer in mind. Mozart, for example, famously had some favorite singers of his, and he would write arias that suited their voice, but they suit lots of other people as well. So he may have well been inspired by Caruso, and Caruso's ability to sustain perhaps longer, higher phrases than any tenor that had come before, with ease, without any sort of discomfort. And so, yeah, for any composer of that period, Caruso would have been a godsend, as Puccini rightly said.
Well, and now we're going to hear yourself singing an aria from Act 2 of the opera Fedora. This is Amor ti vieta.
non t'amerò.
There we heard a more Tivietta from Giordano's opera Fedora, sung by Ezra Williams, who I'm extremely privileged to be joined by today on Radio Verulam. Ezra, can you tell us about the composer Umberto Giordano?
Sure. I mean, I'll just say a word on the aria that you've just played. Thank you for playing it. It's an impossibly difficult aria. If you look at the music, and I'm sure this is deliberate because, you know, he was a very good composer, and he deliberately wrote the vocal part with no rests in it. There is no rest. So theoretically, if you looked at it as a computer might look at it, there's nowhere to breathe. So you have to make the phrases as long as possible, but while still having just enough space to breathe. I mean, at the end of my recording there, the high note at the end, I think that goes on for well over 10 seconds, and it's a killer. It really is a killer. But if you get it right, it's a fantastic aria to sing. I think that took a good few goes of trying it in the studio before we got it right. But I quite like that recording. It's very slow. The conductor took it quite slow, which makes it even harder, of course. But that, you know, I like a challenge as a singer. There's no point in just, you know, singing everything that you find easy. And that's a very, very, very hard part, which is perhaps why it doesn't get done that often. Giordano himself was, again, one of the big Verismo composers who perhaps is also known for one major work, which is Andrea Chenier. And again, an impossibly hard tenor part, but a dream tenor part. I think all tenors would love to sing it. Not all of us get to do it because our voices don't necessarily suit that. I've been lucky enough to sing it, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Have you sung in any operas by Giordano?
Yes, I mean, Andrea Chenier, which is fantastic. It's loosely based on a true story as well of a French revolutionary poet called Chenier. How much of it historically is accurate, I'm not sure. But certainly Marat is a real character, and Robespierre, of course, is a real historical character. Chenier did exist, and I think he was beheaded. But I'm not sure if the whole Magdalena de Coigny, the whole love affair type thing is real. I think that was a sort of love story added to, you know, spice up the opera.
Well, now we're going to hear yourself singing Un Dial Azzurro Spazio from Giordano's opera Andrea Chenier, which premiered in 1896.
Colpito qui m'avete, ovvio geloso cielo, il più puro palpitar dell'anima. Or vedrete fanciulla, qual poema è la parola amor, qui causa di scherno. Un dì all'azzurro spazio guardai profondo e ai prati colmi di viole pioveva allora il sole e folgorava d'oro il mondo, parla la terra un immane tesor, e a lei serviva di scrigno il firmamento. Su dalla terra la mia fronte veniva una carezza viva, un bacio, grida hai vinto d'amore, temo tu che mi baci divinamente bella, oh patria mia. E volli pien d'amore pregar, varca in una chiesa la soglia, non prete nelle nicchie dei santi, e della Vergine accumulava doni. E al sol d'orecchio un tremulo vegliar in vano, chiedeva pane e non stenne la mano. Varcai degli abiti di luscio, un uomo vicario bestemmiando il suolo, e nell'aria appena sazia e contro Dio scagliava, e contro gli uomini le lacrime dei figli. In cotanta miseria la patrizia prole che fa? Sol l'occhio vostro esprime umanamente qui un guardo di pietà, onde ho guardato a voi siccome a un angelo, e dissi con la bellezza della vita, ma poi alle vostre parole un velo dolor m'ha colto in pieno petto. O giovinetta bella d'un poeta, non disprezzate il petto. Udite, non conoscete amor divino rana, non lo scherrir del mondo, anima e vita e l'amor.
There we heard Undiol Azzurro Spazio from Giordano's opera Undrecenia, and performed by Ezra Williams. And I'm extremely privileged to be joined by Ezra Williams today on Radio Verulam. Ezra, can you tell us more about the opera Undrecenia?
Sure. I mean, as I said, it's roughly based on a true story. And the tenor part's a dream. They often say, like with Verdi's Il Trovatore, you need a fantastic soprano, a fantastic tenor, and a fantastic baritone. And if you don't have those three, then the opera will fall fairly flat. It's not done as often, perhaps, as it used to. Well, there's a new influx of tenors coming through who are singing it marvelously. But for a while, it wasn't as often performed. Pavarotti famously had a disastrous run of it. His voice was too lyric for it. It wasn't dramatic enough, and Pavarotti suffered quite a lot in it and then pulled out of the run. But Domingo sang it quite a lot when he was still a fluent tenor. He's not anymore, he's a baritone. And of course, Jonas Kaufmann, the greatest tenor alive now, is singing it. Marcelo Alvarez has sung it. And it is a glorious, glorious opera. I mean, it's full of fantastic tunes. There's 2 enormous love duets and 3 huge arias, including the famous La Mamma Morta for soprano, which perhaps a lot of your listeners may recognize from the film Philadelphia, starring Tom Hanks as the lawyer, I think he was a lawyer, dying of AIDS. It's one of the first big mainstream films to deal with the AIDS crisis, and I think Tom Hanks won his first Oscar for it. And the opera that aria, La Mamma Morta, recorded by Maria Callas in this case, was played twice in the film, not just once, but twice in its entirety. So it obviously meant a lot to the filmmakers, and it's a fabulous, fabulous piece. I mean, emotionally manipulative, perhaps you might say, but rightly so. That opera goes straight to the heartstrings.
Well, as well as being a tenor and a pianist, you're also the musical director of Harrow Opera. Can you tell us about the history of Harrow Opera and your involvement with it?
Well, Harrow Opera was founded 51 years ago now, nearly 52, so long before I was around. And it started out, as a lot of these opera companies do, doing the sort of smaller, almost operetta things like G&S, Gilbert and Sullivan, and things like that. But then sort of developed more into larger or slightly more classical repertoire, perhaps, or less comic repertoire, even, you could argue. And I mean, I got involved with it 4 years ago, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And their previous music director had gone on to other things. I think he'd gone abroad to do something. So they were looking for a new music director. And at that point, I'd been working as music director for London Opera Players and Secret Opera and Brent Opera and various others. At the moment, I'm only music director of Harrow Opera, but that's partly because of COVID, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. So Harrow, I did a production of Rusalka. And the funny story is that they contacted me and said, do you want to, music direct this Rusalka? And I said, oh, of course, yes, that would be fabulous. Thank you very much. And I didn't know the opera at all. So by the following week, when they sent me the score, I was horrified, but in a good way, to see that the music was astonishingly challenging. And of course, being a Czech opera, so I guess Slavic, unlike Italian in any way. In some ways, it's quite Wagnerian, but it was relentless. So very, very tiring to music direct. Because, of course, the music director is doing everything. They're basically playing all the parts, whereas the singers are just playing their part. But that was a joy. That was wonderful. And, of course, then Ballo in Maschera, the masked ball, which we got to the dress rehearsal of. We'd done all the rehearsals. And then, of course, the theatres were closed for COVID-19. So we never got to do that, although we are bringing it to the stage finally after nearly 2 years, a year and 9 months, I think, a year and 10 months. We're bringing it to the stage the week after next.
Well, how can our listeners obtain tickets for Harrow Opera's production of A Masked Ball?
Well, you can look on Harrow Opera's website themselves, but probably the easiest way is to go to the website of the Compass Theatre, Ickenham, and then click on What's On, and it will come up with Harrow Opera, A Masked Ball. It's called A Masked Ball, not Un ballo in maschera, because we're doing it in English, but it is the Verdi opera. And of course, the tradition used to be that operas were done in the language of the country they were performed in. Fritz Wunderlich performed Verdi in German. This was not unusual at all. It's only in the last couple of generations that people have started saying, oh, we want to hear everything in the original language. And that's fine. It's easier to sing in some ways. But I think if you're doing an opera, for an English audience, and most of the singers are English speaking primarily, then why not do it in English? I mean, I think there's perfect justification for that. Makes it much more immediate. Much more, if you don't have any clue what's going on in the Italian, you'll know immediately what's happening in this, because all our cast have very good diction. You can hear exactly what they're saying. That opens on the 14th of October, and it runs for a few days until the 16th. So we're doing a performance each night, and then 2 on the Saturday of October. So yeah, the Compass Theatre in Ickenham.
Well, now we're going to hear Maria Callas performing an aria from Act 2 of A Masked Ball.
che piange al forza m'arretrò ma attraverso la squallida via su coraggio e tu fatti di pietra mezzanotte che veggio una testa tesa a terra si leva sospiro
There we heard Maria Callas performing an aria from Act 2 of Verdi's opera A Masked Ball, which Harrow Opera will be performing at the Compass Theatre in Ickenham. And I'm joined today on Radio Verulam by Harrow Opera's musical director, Ezra Williams. Ezra, thank you for joining us. How did the COVID-19 pandemic affect the activities of Harrow Opera?
Well, it shut us down immediately because theatres were, they were ordered to close, to go dark, as we say in the business. And so, yes, we had the production ready to go. It was right there. I like to joke that we'd even had the chandelier delivered for the ball scene. And we had the sets being built and the gallows and all that. It was already there on stage, and we were due to do the dress rehearsal the next day. And zip, nada, everything closed, everything stopped. And then it was a very odd time for musicians because we didn't really have anything to do musically for a good many months. We managed briefly when lockdown rules were very, very occasionally there was a relaxation and then they went back to full lockdown. So in those small little hiatuses, is it hiatuses or hiati? I don't know, hiatuses, we managed to slip in one or two little masterclasses and things like that. So we kept our toes in the water, so to speak, but there weren't any big performances. And a lot of us ended up doing things online. We ended up recording from our living rooms, or if we were lucky enough to have access to churches where we had worked when they were open. A lot of us could go into the church and record because there was nobody in the venues, there was nobody in the churches. So I did that. I managed to record quite a few things on for YouTube in my local church. It was a crazy time, very, very odd time.
Well, how have choirs and opera companies been affected generally by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, it's different everywhere, and every country seems to have dealt with it in a different way, some perhaps better than others. I'm not criticizing any country in particular. Certainly in Europe, they seem to be able to carry on doing performances because they had the money to test everyone, 3 times a week or something? Whereas other companies weren't so happy to invest that money. Whereas now, of course, it would hardly cost them anything. So times are changing so rapidly during this period, and it's such a period of flux that we're still feeling the effects and sort of getting used to how this is still kind of ongoing in some ways. There was, of course, the famous Aida they did, I think, funnily enough, in Vienna. Yeah, I think it was Vienna, where they had the singers on the side of the stage, and these are world-class famous singers. And the characters on stage were played by giant puppets, who, of course, couldn't give COVID to each other. So there is that. And people found inventive ways, directors found inventive ways to get around having close proximity. And I saw a masked ball, actually, a ballet masquerade different production to ours, obviously, where the whole love duet was performed by the two singers on opposite sides of the stage, which looked bizarre, but of course, necessarily they had to do it. But yeah, I mean, things are relaxing now. Things are getting a little bit more back to normal. Choirs were affected massively because obviously that's close proximity singing. In opera for soloists, we can get away with being quite far apart because, we're fairly loud. But yeah, choirs, because they necessarily have to be grouped together in voice type. Otherwise, you get a complete hodgepodge of sound. You need the sopranos, the mezzos, the tenors, the basses. You need them in their sections pretty much. Even on an opera stage, the choruses are grouped very carefully. The director will work that out. So yeah, I think for choirs, especially church choirs, was decimating. It was absolutely immense problem, but they're slowly coming back, and that's good because all music should be encouraged, whether it's church music or country and western or rap or whatever. I'm glad to see that all music is coming back.
Well, during lockdown, I believe that you published a book, Fairytales and Oddities. Can you tell us about the book?
Absolutely. I do have a side career as a writer. I mean, it's not the first book I've published, but the two are not really connected in any way. I mean, musical things do find themselves into my literary work. But Fairytales and Oddities really was because during lockdown, there was no music work. So, one has to keep busy. And I was very, very fortunate that a publisher contacted me and said, do you have a new book? And I sort of fibbed and said, oh, yes, I've got lots of new stuff. I didn't really, but I rapidly got on with it because there wasn't anything else to particularly do. Fairytales and Oddities, it's not a children's book, I should add. It is an adult book. They're sort of retellings of some classic fairy tales and some I've sort of made up myself. And it's a sort of comic tour de force because my previous book, Losing Henry, was sort of a bit of a downer. It was a bit of a sad book. It was about the loss of someone quite close to me. But Fairytales and Oddities is quite a rip-roaring rampage through kind of different styles. There's a bit P.G. Woodhouseian type sexual farce, and there's sort of gothic stories in castles and ones with water sprites and all this. And yeah, it was quite good fun. I really enjoyed writing it. And it came out a few months ago, and it seems to be doing okay. And I got some good feedback on that. And yeah, I mean, it's thanks for mentioning it because it's a fun book.
Well, how can listeners obtain copies of the book?
Well, Fairytales and Oddities, obviously by Ezra Williams, is available. You can order it from any good bookshop, and on Amazon, of course, and places like that. Just Google Fairytales and Oddities, Ezra Williams online. It should come up with numerous buying possibilities. But the cheapest one is, just for your listeners, is to go to the TSL Publications website, because they're the publisher, and you can buy it for a discounted price from them because you're buying it directly from them. So basically, you're cutting out the middleman because the bookshops take quite a bit of money, and they can put the price up, which I didn't realize actually, quite considerably. So it's a good deal more expensive than the bookshops. It's over £5 more expensive. And so, yeah, TSL Publications is the website to go to. And yeah, just Fairytales and Oddities, it will come up with it.
Well, have you any plans to publish more books in the near future?
Oh, absolutely. It's been such a joy doing the kind of publicity tour for Fairytales and Oddities around while rehearsing A Masked Ball. And it's been such fun, and doing readings and all that, and at the book launch, and lots of people turned up, and it was great. And yeah, I'm working on a new one called Weltschmerz, which is a German word that roughly translates as sort of world weariness. But I don't want to make it sound like it's very depressing, because Weltschmerz sort of has a comic element to it. Oh, Weltschmerz. It's sort of, it's not just a sort of depressing thing. And it's ostensibly a ghost story set in New York. And it's very mysterious, and you're not quite 100% clear what's happening until about halfway through, when it becomes clear that the main narrator had a brother who had done something pretty abysmal, a criminal act in America many years earlier. And he's sort of haunted by this. And then there's a twist towards the end. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. That will, I'm only about 100 pages in, so that will be a full-length novel. That won't be short stories. Fairytales and Oddities was 10 short stories, some of which are quite long, some of which are about 30 pages long. But this is a full-length novel, Weltschmerz. And I'm hoping to finish that maybe next year, or this coming year, rather.
Well, we're going to conclude the programme now by listening to yourself singing Sunrise, Sunset from the 1960s musical Fiddler on the Roof. It just remains for me to say that for the last hour, I've had the very great privilege to be joined on Radio Verulam by tenor, pianist, author and composer Ezra Williams. Ezra, thank you very much indeed for joining us today on Radio Verulam.
Many thanks for having me. And if I may just say, thanks for playing Sunrise, Sunset, because of course this is not opera. And it's nice to sort of hear a different kind of music, which I don't normally sing. I have done some musicals. I've done Carousel and West Side Story. I haven't done a full Fiddler on the Roof, but this is such a beautiful song. And I grew up listening to the great tenor Richard Tucker singing this. And Richard Tucker sort of a bit of slightly frowned upon because he wasn't quite so tasteful as some of the other great tenors these days. But I loved him and I still love him. And there's a big statue of him in Central Park, actually. And so, yeah, so I grew up listening to him singing this, and I thought, oh, I must record this because it's such a beautiful song.
Is this the little girl I carried? Is this the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did they? When did she get to be a beauty? When did he grow to be so tall? Wasn't it yesterday when they were smooth? Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, swiftly flow the days. Seedlings turn overnight to sunflowers, blossoming even as we gaze. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, swiftly fly the years. One season following another, laden with happiness and tears. Now is the little boy a bridegroom? Now is the little girl a bride? Under the canopy I see them side by side. Place the gold ring around her finger, share the sweet wine and break the glass. Soon the full circle will have come to pass. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, swiftly gaze. Swiftly fly the